My name is Heather Wilde, and this is Your Customers Hate You and Other Lies. So this is my brag slide. Hate doing it, but if you don't talk about yourself, then no one else will. So here I am, a double CTO of a company called TWIP and Rocketeer. I've been doing customer experience design for about 20 years now professionally. And I am currently the only female advisory board chair to an engineering school in the United States, which is pretty darn cool, I think. And I was a founding employee of a company called Evernote that some of you may have heard of, and an early employee at a company called Spirit Airlines, which is a small airline in the United States, which is actually the #1 most profitable airline in the US right now. I was voted 2015 Female Executive and Mentor Coach of the Year, and I received an award from the US government for my work in helping schools, helping STEM education within the schools. So I really am passionate about teaching and education and helping more engineers come into the pipeline, because as you know, there's a big shortage of that right now. So we're working on that. And I also write for Inc. and Forbes and Tech.co, so you've probably seen some of my articles as clickbait. Sorry about that, but somebody's got to write them. Might as well be a CTO, right? So thank you for coming to my talk. This is my first time at NDC, and I'm really excited to be here. So starting off with one of my favorite people of all time, Bill Gates. He actually, when people think of customer experience, they really don't think of Bill Gates. They think of Steve Jobs, right? But Bill Gates is really amazing. And this quote really says it all. Because your unhappiest customers are your greatest source of learning. And because they will tell you what you are doing wrong. You know already what you're doing right, because you are the designer, you are the engineer, you are the person that has the vision of your company. But when you are not paying attention to the customer feedback that you're getting, then things are going to go terribly wrong. So if your customers are telling you over and over and over again that one thing is just not working out for them, then your customers are going to go away. So if anyone here remembers Microsoft Bob, yeah, there's a reason that that product only lasted 3 months out in the open, even though they spent multiple years working on the project. So you have to listen to the market once it's there. So we're going to go right into our lies and truths here. So products exist to make designers happy, right? We all make our products because we want them. We think of our products as our babies, and we work really hard for them. Wrong. Products exist to solve customer needs. We are customers in the first place. I mean, we are making products for ourselves as customers, but we're not our only customers. And a lot of times we forget that. As we're sitting and making products, we're examining things, and we're forgetting to actually ask other people what they think of this beautiful thing that we're making. And that is a huge point of failure. So if we are never taking into account what anyone else thinks about the things that we design, that's a big problem. So here's a nice little example in the non-tech world of where product failures happen. So this is an original kind of John Deere tractor. Now, and this is New Zealand. When John Deere tractors came to New Zealand, a lot of people started to get into accidents. Some actually died because the tractors, when they went up the hills, they would fall over. And the reason for that is there was a high center of gravity and a narrow front wheelbase. And the hills were unsurfaced, rough, and hills. And John Deere had never taken into account that humans actually use these tractors, and land isn't always flat. But they designed it because they're like, oh, well, where we are in Iowa, where the John Deere factory is, it's flat. So of course, our tractors are going to be working for that. So once they'd gotten feedback from a whole bunch of people trying to sue the company because they were dying and getting maimed and things, they designed an entirely new tractor that had a roll cage and a low center of gravity and wider wheelbases. So it doesn't look that much different than the original tractor, but it actually took into account the customer feedback. And guess what? People stopped dying. People stopped getting hurt. This is actually a really extreme example of something, because as designers, as product designers, we're generally not creating products when we're designing software that people are going to die from. But some of us actually create hardware that can cause problems. For example, if you're creating a technical product like a life alert thing that goes to Alexa, if that fails, then you have a big problem on your hands, because people are depending on you for literally their lives. So if you don't listen to the customer feedback, then you could end up with a big lawsuit. So good design always accounts for human capabilities. In other words, good design counts for the lowest common denominator. And as engineers, we hate that. We always want to think about the best, the person that's doing the best, the best person on the team, the smartest person, the person that thinks like us. Well, in general, when we create something, it goes out into the world, and we don't know who's going to use it. So we have to assume that the person that's going to use it is going to be in the least worst scenario at any given time. And that means that you have to assume that your thing is going to break because somebody is going to be pushing the wrong buttons in the wrong sequence all of the time. So you better have some good QA testers for everything you use that are good at pushing the wrong buttons all the time. Line number 2, your customers hate you. I hear this all the time from my engineers because they must hate us. Why else would they be barraging us with such terrible feedback all the time? One time, I got an email from somebody that was, every other word was a curse word, and it was just like so berating to my company. And when I replied back within 5 minutes of receiving this, I got an immediate apology saying, "Oh, I thought I was writing to a computer. I had no idea it was a person." So people don't hate you. They wouldn't be using your product if they hated you. They actually like you. And the fact that they're taking the time to write feedback about it, to write in, that means they like you even more. So think about it. If you're using something like Yelp, what makes you write a review? You either really, really love the thing, or you really, really don't like the thing, but you always are trying to help improve it. You have to be incentivized one way or the other to incentivize you to write. So these people that are writing in are your best source of information. Now, I know this is small writing, but here's a great example of customer feedback. So when somebody wrote in saying that they were out, that their sneakers were of the wrong, they had a defect, Zappos, which is a US shoe company, sent this wonderful email back that if I got that, I would be freaked out. But it basically said, "Oh my gosh, we've given you a credit, and we've given you a UPS label to send it back, and we've given you a coupon for a new thing, and unfortunately, we couldn't give you new shoes because we don't have those anymore." So this person anticipated every possible scenario that the customer would have needed and handled it in one email right there. If the customer is upset because of something that's happened, what do you think is going to happen when they get that? They're not going to be upset anymore. I mean, they may be upset that they didn't get their shoes, but what else could they do? Now they've got $15 to spend on Zappos on something else, which they may use now or they may never use, but at least they got their money back and they can go buy their shoes somewhere else. Customers buy based on how you treat them. What do you think about this one? Now, this seems like this seems like something that would be true, right? That like if you treat someone well, then they're going to want to come back. It's how the customer feels they're being treated that's the key. So if you think you're doing everything right, but the customer doesn't, then you've lost them. So what you have to do here is very interesting. You actually have to pay attention to something called empathy and situational awareness, which as engineers, we are very bad at. So we have to read between the lines of what they're actually asking for, of what they're telling us, what they want. And then we give them that back. They're going to pay more to get a better experience. And that's key, because if you don't have customers, you don't have anything. Your business doesn't exist. Now, I know a lot of us work for startups, and technically startups don't need to make money, right? But eventually we do, and we better have customers for that. So all of these things are to say that customer experience is something that you need to start thinking about from day one. And that's how we actually started to scale Evernote. It's so important that from the very beginning of the 8 of us that founded the company, my role was to make sure that we had a very strong QA program, a very strong customer support program, and community engineering to make sure that we were paying attention to all the analytics of what people were doing, what they wanted, what they said they wanted, and test the feedback from that. Customer service is a waste of time. No, because customer retention, just 2%, is actually the same as decreasing costs by 10%. So if you spend money on a customer support team, even just one person, that can actually raise the value of your company 10%. So, and this is from a Forbes study of the Forbes 5,000. This is companies that are in the top ranked companies in the world. They found that just this small focus on customer retention decreases their overall costs. So, because if you don't have to spend money on customer acquisition costs because you now have loyal users, then they are going to actually sell your product for you. They become something called raving fans. Has anyone heard that term before? Yeah. And raving fans are things that you really need if you want to grow your business. Now, something like Microsoft, you have product evangelists. We have many of them here, like Jennifer Marsman this morning. Wasn't her talk great? It was amazing. And she helps to make people raving fans for the company. She is one herself. But without a backbone of those people around the world, you have to develop them yourself. And that can be difficult when you're starting from ground one. We all have heard the problems with airlines around the world. If you're not doing it right, then you have a little bit of a problem. For example, here's the original thing that this guy wrote. They're the worst airline ever. They lost my luggage and can't track it down. Now, that was when it was sent. And then, sorry for the delay in responding, 8 hours later. Our Twitter feed is open. Please DM your baggage ref and we'll look into this. Well, they don't actually refer to what he said. They're not trying to solve the problem. And then they say this, DM me yourselves, is what he says. And they say you can't, if they're not following, but he said he has been following them the whole time. So they didn't check. So what's the point of having a customer support channel that's not actually available to people when they need them? Because an airline is a 24-hour thing. And if they're only open 9 to 5 GMT, when it's a global airline, how is that a useful channel? And I've actually called airlines where their customer service line was not 24 hours on the phone either, or not open weekends. So how is that useful? If you have a customer service channel, if you decide to open one, you better man it, or else your customers are going to get very upset. And if you do decide to do support over a public channel like Facebook or Twitter, you better man it, or else you end up with a very public thing like this. Because 76% of customers, again from the Forbes study, look at customer service as a test of value to their brand. So if they are constantly testing you, they're constantly trying to say, how are you doing? Is this a company that I want to stay with? Because there's so many choices out there. There's so many people that could possibly be there and that you can use. Because, I mean, just like for British Airways, how many other airlines are there that you could possibly use? Tons. Lots of competition. I bet for your company, there's a ton of competition as well. So what you need to do is make sure that you're giving them just a little bit more than the other person. And what could British Airways have done there? They could have checked to DM the guy and then taken that right offline right away. Or they could have a channel that they actually are manning 24 hours a day. Here's one that people really don't understand as well. Customers need support to help them. What do you think about this one, guys? Do you need support to help you? 75% of customers these days solve their issues on their own, especially us. I mean, we're very smart people, right? We use Wikipedia for stuff. We look things up. We create our own Wikipedia pages once we find the answer, and we're like, hey, and here's what to do. So we'll write blog articles about things. We find the answers to stuff. We're smart. We're happy. We're good at this thing. 69% of millennials say they feel good about a company when they can solve it themselves. So what do you think you need to do to make people happy? What could be just a little bit better than what most of us are doing? Something that a lot of people don't think about is actually putting out good release notes. I know. That means you actually have to comment stuff in your code when you're checking it in, and have a technical writer that's paying attention and actually talk to that technical writer and tell them what your code meant. But if you put out good release notes, if you actually put out a blog or some kind of thing that allows the customers to look up what has changed, what's available, and what they can do to fix things. And if you put in, even though this seems ancient, a community forum where people can actually talk to each other about the product in one place, then amazingly, people will feel that your brand is better than other brands. One of the things that we did at Evernote was when we started the company, we started a community forum for it. And it's now one of the, when you search for Evernote, it actually, like, all the answers for Evernote questions come from our forum. People along the way had asked questions and things, but our forum actually ranked higher than our knowledge base. So we actually let our customers start answering each other's questions. And that actually pushed a lot of people away from having to write into support. So it was very helpful to us because it was a very little low-monitored thing. We even had evangelists moderate the forums. So employees didn't even have to take the time to do that because you build raving fans and you have them do that kind of thing. And Microsoft does the same thing. So if you are a company that you start to think about that, you start to pay attention to customer success, it doesn't even take much effort on your part. It doesn't take much resources, and the customers will be happier for it. So if you're doing this wrong, though, if you're not paying attention, you end up a little bit of a pickle. For example, this is from an ISP in the United States. They were sending out a well-meaning service announcement to people during a hurricane. They sent this to people who had no internet access or power to tell them how to deal with the fact that they had no internet access or power. And it gave them a nice web page that they'd set up. So nobody got this until after their power came back on. It was well-meaning, but they hadn't thought it through. And they got made fun of for a bit about that. So when you're trying to do a support channel, make sure that you're actually paying attention to what your customers need. So they thought this was great, and they actually tried. But another ISP, what they had done was they went onto the television channels and the radio channels, and they let people know that they were out in the areas fixing things and getting things ready. Here is another kind of thing that you don't want to happen. This is somebody on Virgin Media, which we're all familiar with. The person says, okay, I can't get through because my phone is dead. So the person has no phone, and he only has chat. So the person says, I can't assist you with that online. Please call our customer care team. My line doesn't work, that's my issue. Okay, but I'm part of the sales team, I don't have it. Please call our customer care team, over and over again. So rather than transferring him in chat or being incentivized somehow or empowered to help, what they did was just keep telling them over and over again that they need to call this number and they can't. So that is poor customer service. So even though they actually had a channel set up and probably even had a chat for support, and he was in the sales chat, they had no way to transfer him to the other, and this person wasn't empowered to help them. So you have to make sure that your agents are empowered to do things. I love this one. So when I'm setting up things, I always have a naming scheme for email addresses. and apparently this one did as well. And their agent, as you can tell, as you can tell, this one was in another language. Because this is actually real. It doesn't seem like it is, but it is. You can email this, and this person is there. But it's a completely different language, and it doesn't mean what this means to us there. But this definitely does, and that guy wanted it changed. But because it was their naming scheme at Accor Hotel, the guy couldn't get it changed. So, so and that's actually an example of internal customer service as well. You have to remember that you're supporting internal customers as well as your external customers, especially those of us in IT. We have to pay attention to the fact that we have to be good to our people. So remember that the way that you're checking is by constantly surveying, by paying attention, by reading between the lines to what people are asking for and understanding why they're asking for these things. And there's such a cost that's associated with this, because I mean, if it's an internal customer, a lot of people aren't engaged in their work, and that is absolutely going to fall back on your external customers. Because if you're not incentivized to do well, then you're going to just kind of you're going to a little bit half-ass it, and then make the people that you're working on not pay attention to anything, and they're going to feel it. So if you're just going to be spouting out your snippets of whatever to somebody over and over again without actually reading what they're saying, then the customer's going to feel that, and they're not going to feel valued. And it actually costs a lot more to acquire a new customer than to keep an existing one. So why not spend the time, the little bit of effort to keep your existing ones rather than send them on their way? Because when they're gone, they're gone. They're really gone. So there is a news reporter in the United States. His name is Dan Rather. And I met him a couple years ago, and he told me this story. He was on an airplane, and he was asked to get up and move. he was in first class, and it was on an airline where he had elite status. And he's Dan Rather, which he's a news legend in America. And so, but the person didn't recognize him. And not that it should matter, he's an 80-year-old man. He's asked to get up and move to the very back of the plane in the back row because they wanted to make room for some crew that was getting on board that needed to move. Well, if I were the gate agent, I would have put the crew in the back, not in the first class. And I certainly wouldn't have moved an 80-year-old man. But he, being a very nice man, he got up and moved and didn't make a fuss out of it. But he asked them, he's like, why are you moving me? I've paid for first class. I was sitting down already, and now it's kind of embarrassing that I have to get my bags and move to the back of the plane. And they wouldn't give him an explanation. They just made him move and said that was that. So the fact that he was then telling this to me, a stranger, a week later after it happened, for no apparent reason, it was just an anecdote that he was telling me, is proof that when you have a bad experience, you tell people about it, all the people about it. And he said that he was never going to fly that airline again. And the reason that he was telling me this was because we were now on a completely different airline that he'd never flown before, and he said that he was now going to fly this airline all the time because his old airline had treated him so poorly. So this, and somebody in here actually knows who Dan Rather is and is like, yeah, the fact that Dan Rather was treated this poorly is like, wow. So if you leave a company, you're not going to go back. How many of you have gotten food poisoning from a restaurant? Yeah. Do you go back there? Yeah. I won't go to Olive Garden ever. And I know this is being recorded. Sorry, Olive Garden, but you poisoned me too many times. So one of the ways that we know how customers feel about us is the NPS score. Is anybody using NPS in their company? Yeah, so the Net Promoter Score is a really great way to understand how customers feel. Now, we get about the same amount of conversion in this as we do from anything. It's only about 1% of customers that fill it out. But 1% is good enough to do a t-test, right, if we're doing data analysis. So we can extrapolate how our overall customer base is doing based on the few people that are filling this out. So we understand that if we've got, if we're in the green or in the yellow, then we're doing really good. If we're in the orange, we're not doing great. At Evernote, we were consistently 9.5 and higher. And that is amazing for a tech company in Silicon Valley. Most of them are like 7 and 8 or lower. But one of the reasons that we were there is because, and I like to think it's because I had a background in the airlines, because I was able to see what was able to be done well and what was not done well. So I actually scaled the company of Evernote as an airline, even though it was a tech company. And it's still done that way. So you don't actually need to exceed people's expectations. And that's the biggest lie of all. All you need to do is give people what they expect. Because nobody does that. No one at all is giving people consistently what they expect. So if you can deliver consistency, and when there's something that goes wrong, if you apologize for it, and you're consistent about your apologies and what you'll follow up with, then you're doing better than 90% of the people out there. And people will appreciate that. All they want is for you to be consistent. You don't have to give 110%. You just have to give 80% most of the time. And then for that rest of the time, you have to give 100%. Because if you screw up, then you better fix it. So here's a little bit of a framework on how to make sure your customers really won't hate you. Now, according to Graham Crossley, who's from Brand Reputation, which is a big customer experience company, he says that a customer that has a good experience will typically tell 3 to 5 people, but a customer with a poor experience will tell 20 or more. So if you extrapolate that to the web, how many people do you think are going to hear that bad experience? Like, how many of you don't buy something on Amazon, or actually Amazon's not here, like how many of you do not go to a business if it's got 1-star reviews? Yeah. I generally filter for 3 stars or more when I'm doing things and just ignore anything that's lower. And that's how we do things. That's just how the world works now. So if we're paying attention to people that we don't even know telling us about their poor experiences, then we're actually, this is 100% true. So if you're doing something, just one thing wrong, then it's going to be on the web forever. And you can't get rid of it. You can't, no matter how many times people will tell you they can pay to get your Yelp reviews removed, you can't. They're lying. There's nobody that can get your things scrubbed from the web. So it's out there. The better thing to do is just never get them up there. But even if you do everything right, customers may still leave, because you may just not be the product they want anymore. Something may happen, and you could release something, and it's just not the same. Just last night, I was talking to somebody, and he's like, oh, Evernote doesn't have 2-factor authentication, so I'm not using it. And I was like, we released 2-factor authentication in 2012. He's like, oh, I didn't know that, because I stopped using you in 2011. So it's a thing that people will leave and then never come back because of one thing that they have. And even if you add all the features that they want, even if you are exactly what they need, then they don't care because you've lost them. And poor experiences, as I said, are shared with at least 20 different people. So if you, just thinking to yourself, when was the last bad experience you had? How many people did you tell? How many reviews did you put? Did you put it on Instagram that you had like the worst beer ever or something? Did you, I'm the person that makes everybody taste the thing that's really bad. And I'm like, oh, you have to try how horrible this is. And then we all have the shared experience of how awful something is, and then we all tell 1 million people about it. And it becomes a fun thing, but then it's actually pretty damaging to wherever we came from. So it is absolutely true that we are social creatures, and we are going to tell people about the negative things. Now, there's one thing that's interesting about this. The value of a positive review is actually more sticky than a negative review, because we forget quickly about the negative things. People have already forgotten about half the things that United Airlines did at the beginning of the year, and they're flying them again. But they remember if like an airline saved a cat 10 years ago, and they're like, oh my gosh, remember that airline that like brought the dogs over from Iraq? Yes, because we like to remember the positive stories, and they stick in our minds better. Be aware of both your verbal and your nonverbal. So when you are, here's a quick question, and I want you to raise your hands for this one. How many of you think that the most important thing in communication are the words that you use? Okay. How about your body language? Okay. How about tone of voice? All right. So you're mostly right. Yeah, so the words that you use are only about 7% of communication. Body language is 50% of that. And if you aren't actually looking at a person, then how do you get the body language across? Well, that's a very difficult thing. If you're on the phone, you can actually kind of sense if somebody's standing, if somebody's breathing heavy or something. But if it's just an email, then you're stuck with just tone. And how many of us have gotten in trouble with trying to decipher tone over an email or a text or something? Yeah. So what you have to learn to do is train yourself, again, with that thing called emotional intelligence that all of us are kind of terrible at, right? So it's a very important thing to learn to read the words behind the words. what somebody's actually asking for. And the way that you start to do that is you pay more attention to yourself. So you pay more attention to the way that you are communicating. For example, I am a very handsy communicator. I make sure that I speak slowly. I use my hands for things, and I am always trying to use the clearest, easiest, most succinct word for the things that I'm trying to use. So even though I may not sound as erudite always as I actually am, I make sure that more people understand what I mean because I'm using the most concise word possible. And that comes to the next one, communicate clearly and concisely with your customers. Who here really loves to read long emails? Exactly. So why would you write them to your customers? They take forever to write. They take forever to read. And by the time, and if you're trying to send somebody troubleshooting instructions, for example, they're lost halfway. So send something in plain English, in bullet points, and in the clearest thing possible. Even if it's going to take multiple back and forths for something, then it's better to do that to make sure that they're going to actually pay attention and be able to follow the steps. One way that I like to help with this is to send videos of things if I'm trying to make sure that things get across, with screenshots if I'm trying to troubleshoot with somebody. So I can show them, here's what you need to do, and this. If I'm in front of somebody, I will actually walk them through stuff. And if it's a product like the John Deere tractor in the beginning, then what they actually did was they were getting all these reports, they didn't understand it, and then they finally went out to New Zealand and saw the people with the tractors, and that's when they finally understood. So you cannot, how many of you have said to themselves that it's not a bug until you can reproduce it? Yeah. I say that all the time. Well, it's on you to reproduce their problem. It's not on them. So you need to figure out what their experience is. And the way you can do that is by helping to walk them through it in the clearest, concisest way possible. Now, this is one of my favorites. Practice the 30-second rule. Yes, the 30-second rule is, and this is good not just for customer experience, but for every part of your life. Wait 30 seconds at least before you respond. So when you see something come in, read it, assimilate it, and then start to formulate what your response will be. Because if you start typing right away to the person that's cursing at you, or if you start answering right away to that person that's upset in front of you, then you may have a little bit of an emotional response there. But if you wait and you start thinking logically about what it should be, then you'll be able to respond in the proper way. You'll be able to empathize with the person, and you'll be able to see their side. Because if you don't, then see the part about things ending up on the web and people telling at least 20 people. And be considerate of other people's needs. It's kind of like the golden rule, right? We want to be treated well. So why don't we treat our customers well too? Like, we want them to stick around. And even though they're telling us that everything that we're doing sucks right now, that it's not working, that we developed it in a poor way, why don't we actually see through the feedback and figure out how to make it work? Because they're taking the time out of their life, and that's so immensely valuable, their time. Why don't we actually take the time to listen to what they're saying? And that leads to building genuine, caring relationships. So one of the best things that came out of me working at Evernote was the relationships that I got with my customers. They would correspond with me all the time. sometimes they would actually start to write feedback emails even though there was nothing wrong or they didn't have anything to say, just because they wanted a person to talk to. And I became, I started to get to know them really well. There was one person that I found who was a homeless person, and he was using the product because it was the only place that he could store his things, because it was an online repository and he had no place to store anything. So he was doing research, and he was storing all of his pictures, all of his online searches and everything. And then I started to notice that there were other homeless people that were using Evernote as well from libraries. And by getting to know this one person, I started to get to know the entire homeless community of a town. And now in the town where I live, I help with the homeless shelters there and help them understand how to get university degrees, even though they're still homeless, because there's programs that exist for them. And I bet every single one of you has some kind of a story like this, where they've met somebody through your job that has just taken it to another level. And if you haven't, then you will if you open yourself up to the possibility of that kind of thing. I know that companies like Microsoft actually have volunteer days that they use for their employees so that they can go out into the community and start to get to know not only who the Microsoft users are, but just go out to volunteer, because it's something that makes you a more complete person. So if you build that caring relationship, then it'll actually make your job more enjoyable and the products better. And if your customers are valued, then that information that they give you becomes more valuable, because it goes from somebody telling you everything sucks, you better fix it, to this thing, your product is awesome, it could be better here, 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 and here. And here's screenshots, and here's exactly what it is. And they start to do more of the work for you, and the conversation changes. Because when you're talking to a friend about your product, they don't want to tell you things are terrible. They'll couch it in a compliment. So if you have a genuine, caring relationship with people that value you, then they will give you honest feedback in a nice way that you can accept. And that's actually one of the most valuable things of all, because you want that feedback to come. You want more feedback to come from people, because if you don't have it, you don't have customers. You want people talking about your product. And the more people that talk about your product, the more successful you're going to be. And that's actually the real secret behind this. If you have no customers, if you have no one sending you any feedback, then your product's doomed to failure. So if you have people telling you that you suck, then you're on the right track. So with that, I'm going to open this up to some Q&A. And anyone that has seen me before knows that if you ask a question, you get a rubber ducky. So if you would like a rubber ducky, then please ask a question. And if not, then you're welcome to not get a ducky or to go. But I thank you for coming today. And does anyone have any questions? We also have a microphone if you do ask a question. So just wait for the microphone to come to you if you're asking anything. Anyone? You don't get the duck if you don't ask or anything. They're super cute. All right.
My question is, in the intro notes to the talk, you mentioned pivots of products based on customer feedback. So one specific issue we are dealing with in my company, where we have an Android app and we receive review from our users, is that we don't know whether this is an outlier or should we pivot or not. So do you have any stories related to that?
Yes. So one of the things that I like to do is for every, you generally, because you're an Android product, you know how many downloads you have, so you know how many installs you have. For every person that you get feedback from, make it a multiplier of X to how many people are out there actually reporting something. So for example, at Evernote, we had 100 million users, so I would assume that for every one person reporting something, it was about 10,000 people with the same problem. So figure out what that multiplier is for you, and then determine how much effort you should spend on that problem. I think I would always spend more time on the people that are saying something is wrong. If, for example, if you release something and suddenly you notice that your app downloads are way down, you screwed up a lot. So figure out what the people that care enough to tell you are telling you, and then fix that right away. For example, one time we released, at Evernote, we released an iOS version where we'd completely changed the color scheme to green on green on green. And it was super pretty. It was a beautiful flat design. It was really pretty. And it passed all the accessibility tests, if that's what you're thinking was the problem. It was not. What was the problem was color blindness, red-green color blindness people couldn't see. So even though it was within the right frame for accessibility, we didn't realize that there were that many people over a certain, it was a combination of that and also the light gray text that everybody uses, that light gray font with the green was almost illegible if you have reading glasses. And we had a lot of people in our demographic that were over the age of 50 and had reading glasses. So they couldn't on their screens read their text anymore, so they just gave up and started using the computer version of Evernote, and that lowered our metrics. So, but they couldn't tell us what was wrong. We just had to notice from the metrics that like the app installs were way down and the app usage was way down. And then finally, one person was like, dudes, I don't know what you did, but I can't see my stuff anymore. Can you put in like a magnifier or something? Well, the magnifier wasn't right, but what we did was we allowed people to change the color schemes, and that fixed it. So it's understanding what your metrics are, who your demographics are, and paying attention to outliers like if only one person is telling you they have a problem, again, it's not a bug unless you can reproduce it. If like 4 people are telling you you have a problem, then it's something you really need to look at. Sure you don't want that? All right. Anyone? All right.
As a software developer, most of the time I'm always struggling on how to explain to the users like these things are not, solutions are not really possible. So how do I deal with, what's the approach on how to explain to the users that it's not really possible, and what are the alternatives for that?
Thank you for the feedback. That's not currently on the roadmap. We appreciate your input. But I mean, it always start with a thank you, and like letting them know that like saying it's not currently on the roadmap leaves it open to the fact that you would be considering it in the future. So even though like you're giggling at that, I swear that my hands still automatically can type, we apologize for the inconvenience faster than anything else. And again, I'm a CTO, I'm an engineer, but like I can still, no matter what, we apologize for the inconvenience. So thank you for the feedback. Like all of these things should be so commonplace. And that's another key thing. I refuse to let any of my agents use snippets for customer service text. Even though we had pre-written things, I made them type every single one of them out because I wanted them to feel it inside every time they were sending things. So that, of course, made us a little bit slower sending things out, but that wasn't a metric I cared about. I cared about our NPS score to make sure if people were actually happy with what we sent. And sometimes we had typos, and actually people found that to be more human because they knew that it was a real person typing a real response to them. So again, making sure that you acknowledge that they've sent you feedback, let them know that you're not going to do anything about it, right now, but it may be something that you could consider in the future. Could be, probably not, but like giving them the hope that if they stick with you, their ideas may actually get in there is something that that could be. And realistically, most ideas that people suggest always end up in the product somehow anyway, sometime. At Evernote, I think 90% of the customer feedback ended up in some way in the product by the time, I mean, over 10 years. It took a while. But I mean, if it's a good idea, it's going to get in there. If it's not a good idea, then thank you for the feedback. It's not currently on the roadmap. Anyone else? Oh, and.
So in one of your slides, you talk about Amazon. So actually, correction is Amazon is actually here in Australia.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I'm curious about what do you want to talk about Amazon?
Oh, so Amazon has really good customer service in that they have 24-hour. So they have chats that you can access all the time. They do automatic refunds for people, even if there's nothing wrong. They always side with the customer. They send you return shipping labels. It's very similar to Zappos. In fact, Zappos is an Amazon company now. But Amazon is a company that even if you're not buying something directly from Amazon, but from an Amazon partner, they will make everything right. So say you get a shipment of something from Amazon, and out of the whole thing, something broke and it stained the rest of the things in your shipment. They don't need you to send it back. They'll give you a complete refund, and they'll ship out another thing for free. And they just do that. Or they'll notice that something is going to be delayed, so they will. Without you even having to call them up, they will order another one for you through a different distribution center that it'll get there faster, and then they'll redirect the original package back to them. So they have an amazing amount of customer service stuff built in, but it's just part of their whole ecosystem to do that. And when you guys fully get the full Amazon experience, you will see, like in Vegas, for example, we have a big distribution center for Amazon right there, so we get delivery within an hour for most things. And yeah, yeah. So I don't even need to leave my house most of the time, which is great as an engineer. I can just like, okay, I would like some coffee and some yogurt and some strawberries. All right, great. Thank you, Amazon. It's awesome. Anyone? Good. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. This was my first ever talk at NDC, and I really am excited to be here, as I said before. I do love feedback. There are feedback cards outside. I hope you all pick green, like the NPS score, but you don't have to if you didn't feel it. I understand. You can reach me at if you want to at any of these methods. I am very active on Twitter. As well, and I am here for I'm going to be doing the Spectacular Failures talk tomorrow night, and I'm doing a talk on anticipatory design tomorrow, and I am really looking forward to both of those. So thank you guys for coming, and have a great conference.